The word haunted, I'm sure you know, usually applies to a house, graveyard, or supermarket that has ghosts living in it. But the word can also be used to describe people who have seen and heard such horrible things that they feel as if ghosts are living inside them. By Lemony Snicket. Hello, my name is Mark Kuruvilla, and I will be talking about the Conjolier Mansion. I will also be debunking it towards the end. According to the story of the house on Ridge Avenue, it was located in a quiet residential neighborhood in Manchester, on the north edge of Pittsburgh. A man named Charles Wright Conjolier built it in the 1860s. He made a fortune for himself in Texas following the Civil War, and these men were commonly known in the South as carpetbaggers. They made a lot of money preying on the broken economy in the former Confederacy. Conjolier left Texas by a river steamer, taking with him his Mexican wife, Lida, and his servant girl named Essie. When the boat docked in Pittsburgh for coal, Conjolier decided that the Pennsylvania town looked like a good place to live. The three of them left the ship, and Conjolier purchased a lot and began the construction of the house. A few months later, the new brick-and-mortar mansion was completed. It was located at 1129 Ridge Avenue and was considered one of the finest houses in the area. From the expansive lawn, Conjolier could look out and see where the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers meet to form the Ohio, giving a beautiful view. The former carpetbagger soon became a respected member of the local business community, and his new home became a frequent site for parties and social gatherings. Then, during the winter of 1871, an event took place that would never leave the house the same for centuries to come. That winter, as cold snow settled over the region, Conjolier became embroiled in an affair with his servant girl, Essie. Whether she was a willing participant or not, Essie soon became a constant bed partner for her employer. For several months, Lida Conjolier did not know about the affairs Essie was having with Charles, but when three people live in the same house, it doesn't take too long before secrets are revealed. One afternoon, when Essie did not respond to her call, Lida went to Essie's room looking for her. As she came down the hallway, she could hear heavy breathing and moaning from behind the door. Knowing that her husband was the only man in the house, Lida became enraged. She hurried to the kitchen, snatched up both a butcher knife and a meat cleaver. As she began climbing up the stairs back to her servant room, Lida began screaming with rage, which naturally provoked a panic inside of Essie's bedroom. Before Conjolier and the girl could dress themselves and exit the room, Lida had already taken up a post outside. When the door opened, she brought the meat cleaver down on the head of the first person to open it, which was Charles Conjolier. He had fallen to the floor with an opening in his lips. Blood was pouring down from the wound on his head. As he reared back, screaming in horror, Lida began to stab her husband 30 times. Several days later, a family friend called at the house, and when no one responded to his knock, he opened the door and looked inside. He called out, but there was no answer in the dark house. However, as he entered the foyer, he could hear a faint creaking noise in the parlor. He called out again, but there was no answer. He walked further into the house. Following the odd sound, he entered the parlor and saw Lida Conjolier rocking back and forth in front of the large bay window. The window chair that she rested in creaked with each backward and forward motion that she made. "Lida, is everything all right?" he spoke to her. There was no reply. Lida continued to rock back and forth in the chair. As her friend grew closer, he could hear her softly singing a lullaby under her breath. It was a child's nursery rhyme. He soon realized. He saw a bundle that was wrapped in the blanket in Lida's arms. She held it close as she would hold a baby, rocking it gently. The man felt a sudden chill course through him. He knew that the Conjoliers had no children. He spoke to her once again, but there was still no answer. Lida stared straight ahead at the snow outside. Her eyes glazed and unfocused. He gently leaned over and eased the bundle out of her hand. He carefully opened the pink blanket and then recoiled with horror. Dropping the bloody bundle onto the floor, it landed on the wooden floorboards with a solid thud, and the contents of the blanket rolled away. The friend fell backwards on the couch as Essie's bloody head came to a halt a short distance away from his feet. More than 2 decades after, the house on Ridge Avenue remained empty. Local folks considered the place tainted and avoided it at all costs. Few dared to even trespass on the grounds, although sometimes small children threw stones at the windows and sang about the old battle axe and her meat axe. In 1892, the house was renovated into an apartment building to the house railroad workers. Most refused to stay in the place for long. They consistently complained of hearing screams and the crying of a woman that came from empty rooms. Others spoke of threatening sounds of a rocking chair and of a woman mumbling old nursery rhymes and lullabies. Within 2 years, the house was abandoned once again. It remained vacant until 1901, when Dr. Adolph C. Brunrichter purchased the house. The doctor became something of a mystery in the neighborhood. Although he had been warned of the past history of the house, he chose to buy the place anyway. And after moving in, he had little to do with the nearby residents. He spent a lot of time alone and was rarely seen by those who lived close to him. Everyone in the neighborhood watched and held their breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. They didn't have to wait too long. On August 12, 1901, the family who lived next door to the Brunrichter mansion heard a terrified scream coming from the house. When they ran outside to see what was going on, they saw a bright red flash illuminate the interior of the mansion. The windows of the house shattered, and the glass shot out onto the grass. The air was filled with the smell of ozone, and the earth under the neighborhood trembled, cracking the sidewalks and knocking over the furniture in the surrounding homes. By the time the police and fire department showed up, a crowd gathered outside of Brunrichter's house. It was assumed that the doctor was still inside because no one had seen him leave, but none of the neighbors were brave enough to go in and check. Finally, a group of firefighters entered the house in search of Brunrichter. They were unable to find him, but what they did discover was enough to send even the bravest of them running for the street outside. In one of the upstairs bedrooms, a disgusting scene awaited the police investigators. Lying on the blood-soaked bed was a decomposed, naked body of a young woman. Her head was missing and was later found in a makeshift laboratory that the doctor had set up in another room. From what the detectives could see, Brunrichter had apparently been experimented with severed heads. Using electrical equipment, he had been trying to keep them alive after being cut off. A problem in his equipment clearly caused the explosion. The young girl's head was found with several others, and the graves of 5 women were discovered in the cellar. Each of the bodies could be matched with one of the heads from the laboratory. As for Dr. Brunrichter, there was no sign of him. He had apparently escaped during the confusion following the explosion and had vanished. A manhunt produced no clues. He had disappeared without leaving a trace. In September 1927, an old man was arrested in New York's Bowery district. He was found wandering in a drunken stupor. Living among the homeless and street people, he was arrested and booked for public drunkenness and was taken to the local police station house. Standing in line with the other dirty and disheveled men, this particular homeless person seemed to give off what the other officers would later recall as a bad feeling. As the drunks shuffled along, the policemen entered their names into the record one at a time. When the old man reached the head of the line, the officer asked his name. He replied in a harsh tone, slightly slurred with a foreign accent, "My name is Adolph Brunrichter," the man said, and soon he began to tell stories to the officer at the police station, and they were tales even the most hardened officers would not soon forget. Brunrichter began explaining to the officers that he was once an eminent doctor, a physician who worked very hard to prolong life. Unfortunately, he can only succeed with his experiments by ending the lives of certain test subjects. He told of how many years later he had bought a house in Pittsburgh to which he enticed young women as guests. Anticipating romance, the women were beheaded instead, and then used in experiments to keep their severed heads alive. Brunrichter was kept behind bars for 1 month at Blackwell Island. Despite newspaper stories that called him the Pittsburgh Spook Man, the Mad Doctor was deemed harmless and was released. On the wall of his cell, scrawled in his own blood, were the words, "What Satan hath wrought, let men beware." After those fateful words, nothing was ever heard from the man who claimed to be Dr. Adolf Brunrichter again. Now I will be explaining how the legend is debunked. Like most legends, the story of the house is a clever mixture of fact and fiction, although in this case there is much more fake than fact. First of all, no one named Charles Wright Congealier ever existed, and neither did his wife Lyda. There are no records of any dealings in Texas, and no record of him ever living in Pittsburgh. Also, there are no police or criminal records that state Lyda murdered her husband and the servant girl in 1871. The use of date here adds solidity to the story, but it also makes it easier to detect the trueness of the tale. There is none. Secondly, the house that is described in the story was not a mansion. The house was really located at 1129 Ridge Avenue, but it was built in the late 1880s, not in the 1860s. It was a standard Manchester row house, commonly owned by working-class people of the day. It must be mentioned, however, that the house was later owned by members of the Congealier family, even though Charles Wright Congealier and the murderous Lyda were results of a creative imagination. The house was built in the late 1880s, and while it was a working-class home, it was not used to house railroad workers. During the time, it was owned by Mary Congealier, who would go on to become the only recorded death associated with the house, and it was never bought by anyone named Dr. Adolf Brunrichter. Like Charles and Lyda Congealier, he had never actually existed. This seemed weird to me, since his crimes would have clearly been horrible and shocking enough to get the attention of reporters and crime writers. The reason that Dr. Brunrichter disappeared was because he never actually existed in the story. So even though the story seems scary, creepy, and realistic, it's all a fake story just to tell around the campfire.